after this. But we thought it was interesting, it was fun also to call this lookout Malvento, because 20 years after that, we have another island which is basically fighting against the system, against the rule of the central state. And even if this island is not declaring itself independent from the rest of Italy, is declaring its energy policy independent from the rest of Italy. So it's going with a completely different direction of energy policy compared with the rest of Italy. And the name of this island, I think this island is a little bit more known than Malvento. The name of the island is obviously Sardinia. You know that Sardinia started a fight against the rest of Italy with regard to the energy transition. So they declare war to renewables, and they did this with a crazy law that we will analyze in details during this conversation. And this law was, it's very much discussed among renewable players and utilities and investors, because many fears that this kind of opposition and this typology of approach that Sardinia had towards renewables may become common with other regions. So they fear that this may spread out of Sardinia and become a common approach also in the other regions. You know that regions are called to define a legislation in the next few months on these aree idonee suitable areas, and they have a lot of freedom in doing this. So many fears that the example of Sardinia will be followed also by other regions. And this started, quite a pessimistic narrative on renewables in Italy, which, to be honest, we don't think it's consistent with data. It's consistent with what actually is going on also in other regions. We will see this also, but also other regions have started the preparation work for the aree idonee laws, and most of the regions are working on a very reasonable set of rules which will not reduce the space for renewables. So we don't think that this narrative, which started from Sardinia, is justified in this market, which indeed was, is, and will be a big market. The dimension of the market is the most important thing we need to focus on, and this is a big market. We know that Italy is a big market for renewables for a series of things. We know that, for the PNIEC, which is basically the plan for climate and energy made by Italy and shared with the European Union only a couple of months ago. And the PNIEC designed a big market for Italy in the next 8 years in terms of renewables. We know that for the FEDEX, which is going to support in the next 6 years 60 gigawatt. This is unique in the whole European scenario, probably the biggest program we have in Europe in terms of support for renewables. And a few weeks ago, this big dimension of the market was confirmed by Terna and Snam. Terna, as you know, is the TSO for the power system. Snam is the TSO for the gas system. Together, they make these scenarios, which are basically the idea of the evolution of the power and gas market in the next few years in very detail. And what do we know when we look at these scenarios, which were made by Terna only a couple of weeks ago? We know for solar, for instance, I'm showing you solar here. We know that we need to go from the current 30 gigawatt to 70 to 80 gigawatt in the next 6 years. So this is the target we have for 2030. It means that any year we need to commission something in between 6 and 7 gigawatt of new capacity in order to get to this target. In the whole period, it makes 40 to 50 extra gigawatts to be commissioned. And then there is something else beyond 2030. By 2035, we need to make from 3.3 to 4.1 gigawatt per year. And then after that, 2035 to 2040, more or less the same, 3.6 and 4 to something in between 3.6 and 4.2 gigawatt per year in order to reach eventually something which is close to 120 gigawatt of commission capacity in 2040. There is also 2050, which is much more than that. It's not depicted in the Terna scenarios. This is the PNIEC again, but for that period, the projected capacity to be installed each year is in between 12 and 14 gigawatt. So it's a big market. It's a big market, and I think we should focus on this. It's also big for wind. We need to, for wind, still looking at the Terna scenario, we need to commission something in between 1.4 and 2.3 gigawatt in the next 6 years, any year. So that makes it for the whole program 10 to 16 gigawatt of new capacity to be commissioned before 2030. And more or less the same numbers are seen in the following years, in which you see we are still in between 1.5 or 2 gigawatt to 2.5 gigawatt per year of new capacity. So I wouldn't define this market, the renewable market in Italy, a small market. I think this is a big market, which was, and this thing was confirmed by Terna in its last document. You may say that we already knew this because more or less those same figures were shown in the PNIEC, which was shared by the government a couple of months ago, 3 months ago, and it was sent to Brussels. But Terna, in its scenario, they do something more than giving you just a figure. You know that the government within the PNIEC, they just told us the dimension of the market. They just told us the gigawatt overall, but they didn't give us any more details on what type of capacity are we gonna commission, the business model, if it's gonna be, for instance, for solar, small scale or utility scale, or where it's going to be, if it's north or south. They didn't tell anything like this. Terna, they did. They were very detailed in showing when, where, and what typology of capacity will be commissioned in the next few years, according to their scenario. They did this, this scenario I'm discussing are not the first which were published. They did exactly the same exercise a couple of years ago. And again, just to give you the sentiment of the system of the deep state, in this version of this scenario, as a first thing, there is more solar capacity to be commissioned compared with the previous scenario. They are projecting 5 gigawatt to be of capacity more than what they projected 2 years ago. So the overall target again is almost 40 gigawatt. And there is a little bit different distribution compared with the past in between distributed solar and utility scale capacity. You see that in the past it was mostly utility scale. The idea they had 36 gigawatt of utility scale versus 8 gigawatt of distributed capacity. Now it's a different distribution. There is a strong growth of the distributed capacity. So they expect to have almost 20 gigawatt of new distributed capacity in 2030 and almost 30 gigawatt of utility scale capacity. And this is something we didn't know before. And then the zonal distribution you may see here. You may notice immediately that there is a big figure here in the north, 20 gigawatt to be commissioned in the north, according to Terna. And this is one of the news of this plan. This is one of the big news of the, let's say, of the vision of the market by the TSO compared with a couple of years ago. They are projecting less capacity in the south. You see that compared with 2022, the previous scenarios, there is 9 gigawatt less of capacity in the south, which was moved to the north, where the growth of renewables is expected to be much more than in the past. We try to summarize these, differences from the old view, the 2022 view, with the new view, 2024 view of the TSO in this slide. And as a first thing, as I told you, there is an increased target overall at the national level for solar. So 5 gigawatt more than in the past. They take these 5 gigawatt from other technology, let's say from basically from, I don't know, there is a problem with the animation, I'm sorry, okay. They take these 5 gigawatt from basically thermal energy and they move to solar, residential and CNI, especially in the north. This is the first difference we have. The second difference, they move 10 gigawatt from the south and they put it in the north. So they expect less growth of solar in the south, especially in the utility scale segment, and more growth in the north and in the central northern regions like Tuscany and Marche, for instance, by assuming extra 9 gigawatt in this area, both on a small scale and utility scale. And then third thing you see here on the right side, they reduce the capacity they expect, for instance, in Sardinia and in the central southern regions, and they increase the capacity they expect in the north. These are the main movement. What does this mean? Well, probably compared with a couple of years ago, they have some new things to take into account. For instance, now they know there is a burden sharing, so there is quota of production that any regions need to reach within 2030. This was not known in 2022, so they need to align the new scenarios to this fact. And the burden sharing is quite demanding for the northern regions, so probably this is one of the reasons why the targets for the north are much higher than in the past. And then probably, I don't know, they fear that they might have some difficulties in permitting new grid in the south, and that's why they increase the target in the north. Who knows? Probably this could be one of the reasons. Also, again, they increased a lot the numbers for distributed capacity. Is this why they saw that the capacity for CNI and residential was extremely high in 2022 and 2023, and so they expect to have, a new dimension of the market for this technology. Probably these are all part of the reasonings they've made before making this new number. And this is wind. Compared with the past, you see the total wind target for 2030 compared with 2 years ago, it's higher. So if 2 years ago they defined the target of 14.6 gigawatt, now the target is almost 16 gigawatt. but this is not the main difference, if you ask me. And the first thing I notice when I look at the data is the different distribution compared with the past between onshore and offshore. In 2022, there was a very, 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 very high amount of offshore capacity. They were projecting insanely high. And now these compared, I mean, I'm saying insanely because you know that for offshore capacity, they need support because the LCOE is very high, and the only support we have now is around, you know, the available volume is around 3.5 gigawatt. So we were wondering how those 8 gigawatt were possible, and probably they did the same, and that's why they reduced a lot the capacity they are now expecting for offshore in 2030, which is 2.1 gigawatt, and they increase consequently a lot the amount on onshore capacity to be commissioned. And I think this is, you know, the main difference between the past. First thing, again, increase of overall wind capacity. Second thing, a switch between offshore and onshore. Onshore capacity was increased. Here you see some details on the zonal old figures versus the new figures. And for instance, this is Center South, which in terms of offshore basically mean Lazio. In the past, they were expecting some capacity to be commissioned in Lazio, offshore capacity. Now they don't. You see Sardinia and Sicily, they were expecting 1.4 gigawatt, and now it's just 600 megawatt each, and mostly south, which is Apulia for offshore, from, you know, almost 4 gigawatt to 600 megawatts. So basically, there is a new view on this by the TSO, which is impacting a lot on the capacity for offshore. But let's move back to you know, to the first message, to solar mostly. And as I told you, a huge increase in the expectation of solar development in the north. Does this make sense or not? Andrea Musso, which we tell you if it does or not. Andrea, floor is yours.
Thank you, Tommaso. Good afternoon, everybody. So, as you were saying, the target for solar in the north projected by Terna-Snam is quite high, let's say. Is it too high? Is it too ambitious? At first look, maybe we could say yes, because it's basically the 40%, almost 40% of the utility scale target for the period 2023-2030. So, as we usually consider utility scale development in Italy, we basically looking at southern Italy, so where it's easier to develop large scale projects, the land costs are lower, and basically most of the capacity is built. But if we look deeply at the Terna-Snam scenario, we could see that they are considering solar plants as utility scale, all the solar plants larger than 200 kilowatt. So, and if you look at the historical values, we're basically looking at something on the range of the 50% of the total commission capacity is located in northern regions, if we look at the plants larger than 200 kilowatts. If we look at larger plants, so larger than 1 megawatt or even larger than 10 megawatt, so if that's usually the capacity we are looking for utility scale plants, large utility scale plants, then this value is much lower, is in the range of the 10% for larger plants. However, if we do count the figures of the Terna-Snam scenarios, we can say that this is basically in line with past few years. In terms of development, on the other end, we are looking at lower figures, so in the range of the 20%, with, however, an increasing trend, so which is share among the three figures. So the STMGs, which are raising to the 14% of the total Italian contribution to the filings, and the permits, which are in the range of the 20%. So the key message that they're giving us is basically they're basically saying there is going to be a large increase in the capacity, and the second message that we're extracting is the development is not yet very mature. So basically there is quite large market space for large scale plants, because the development has not yet really started on those regions. On the permitting side, we identified 4 main reasons that may contribute on targeting a strategy towards northern regions. First of all, if we look at national VIA, so the procedure that basically gather more requests, and it's going to be the first procedure in terms of megawatt permitted for the next years, especially for larger plants. We are looking at a conversion rate between the national positive VIAs to the regional AUs, which is over 40% in northern regions compared to 11% for the rest of Italy. And regional authorizations are received for projects in a much faster time frames, so 5 months compared to 10 months. And this 10 months figure is probably going to be much higher, because there are many projects which are still waiting for the authorization in regions like Puglia. If we switch to the permitting, to the regional permitting, also in this case, the power is proceeding with better success rates in northern region. To give you, let's say, a synthetic figure to understand also more the market space point of view, we were looking before at in an environment in which development has not spread so much. We wanted to provide you with a synthetic figure that could, with just an index, give you an idea of this. I mean, of these, and in this case, sorry. So we try to. Ma per la presentazione va ancora? Sì. Ma ancora? No, ma ancora la presentazione, no, perché ho schiacciato un tasto, ma non so che.
Yes, it's working, Andrea.
Working, okay. No, as I was saying, we try to synthesize with just an indicator the total development space with the regional target. And the idea was to give a mortality rate to the different parts of the pipeline. So we assign 90% success rate, so a 10% mortality to ready to build megawatt. A 20% mortality rate, so 80% success rate projects with positive VIA, then 30% success rate to fight projects, and a 20% success rate to megawatt with STMGs. This gives us basically the total pipeline and the current development, which is, for example, in Sicilia was 16.3 gigawatt, and we were comparing this value with the regional target for utility scale solar up to 2030. And this was calculated on the basis of the suitable areas and Terna scenarios. And for Sicily, this value would have been 2.8. On the right, you can see the map displaying all the values for all the regions in Italy. And I mean, you can see from the picture that there's quite a difference between regions in the north that are all green with an index that is lower than 1, and regions in the south where you have Puglia, Sicilia, Sardinia, Basilicata that are all or over 3 or just like in the range of the 3. So we're basically looking at something like 3 to 4 times the regional target, and with comparison to the north, where you have regions like Lombardia, Emilia-Romagna, or Veneto, where this figure is much lower. So the development space, as we were saying, is much higher. So both the targets that are suggesting a much wider increase, and also the development space is much larger. So now we're looking how to develop projects in the northern area. We have basically two ways. One is going through National Via, which is the procedure that is now gathering more projects, more solar projects, and all the larger projects. If we are looking at the figures, we are basically looking at a 10% rate of projects located in the north from the requests, and these projects are basically performing better than projects located in the south, because the 10% transforms in 17% if we're looking at positive via. The average size of the projects is basically the same for the request, and is slightly higher, the average size of projects receiving positive via in south. Theoretically, the projects that should be processed earlier by the Commission, I mean, according to the regulation, should be the projects with larger size. Currently, if we look at the data, we don't see this rule being respected by the Commission, because if we look at the data, all the projects that received, or I would say most of the projects that received the positive via are the ones that were being filed before, and with just few exceptions of projects of 200, 300 megawatt. And so theoretically, as this rule should be respected, the idea of the market was that southern regions were characterized by larger projects and were to be prioritized in the via. Actually, we are not seeing that. So the procedure that is gathering the more requests is basically not penalizing the northern areas. Recently, it was published in the Gazette, approved the Decree Ambiente. The Decree Ambiente is basically stating that the MASE should publish a decree defining new categories of priority. For the moment, they are indicating 3 categories. The first one is green hydrogen projects, and 3 categories of priority, to which 60% of the Commission personnel will be dedicated. The first category, and the categories are in order of priority. So the first category will be green hydrogen projects, and also the coupled RES plants. So this may be a shortcut for having the project processed before others. The second category is revamping, repowering, modifications, while the third category is photovoltaic and agrivoltaic plants over 50 megawatt, and onshore wind plants over 70 megawatt. If we look at the first of the photovoltaic and agrivoltaic plant over 50 megawatt, we are basically seeing not much difference between north and rest of Italy. So we are basically in the same share of the 10%. So there's not going to be much impact from the Decree Ambiente till the MASE will not publish the decree containing the definitive categories. So this is the first way, going through National Via, and as we were seeing, it's not going so bad as we might have thought. The second way of having a project permitted is going through regions, so going through power. As we were saying before, the success rate are quite higher, and also the time the average time of the power is much lower in the northern regions. This might be due to the lower crowding of the markets of the regional offices in the northern region, while southern regions, especially Sicilia, Puglia, also Sardinia, have to cope with a much higher level of requests. The second procedure, regional, I mean, in this case, it's the authority is the local office, is called PAS, is a simplified procedure. And in this case, we don't see much difference between North and rest of Italy, because as I was saying, the local office is in charge of the procedure, so it may vary also widely in even in a region, but also in the same province, for example. However, the operators that are currently dealing with the PAS are saying that it's going basically quite good overall in Italy, with an average length of 6 months. The projects that are going through this procedure are not varying between North and rest of Italy, and are industrial for a quarter of the projects and solar bells for the rest three quarters. Let's say in general, we are mapping also regional legislation throughout the year with the Devon deals that has his regional regulation focus, and with the regulatory alert. We are also mapping in terms of more qualitative analysis, a different sentiment between northern regions and southern regions. With northern regions, that tends to have a more favorable approach. And for this lookout, we are reporting 2 examples. The first one is Lombardia, regional Lombardia, that approved the first draft, initiated the consultation for the first draft of a law on suitable areas. The law is basically identifying a set of suitable areas that are not so different from the ones indicated in the RED II decree. So this is a positive message for the market. And the suitable areas identified by regions include also the CQuater, so 500 meters from protected areas for solar projects and 3 kilometers from protected areas for wind projects. The unsuitable areas, on the other hand, are, I mean, all areas that were identified in all the plan or all the past plans. So UNESCO sites, archaeological sites, DOP IGP areas, nothing that, not big news for us, and it's a very positive news. Let's say that the best news is that they did not apply the 7 kilometers buffer from protected areas, which we will see later with Tommaso. Some regions decide to apply. The second example is coming from Veneto. The region approved the first draft of the regional plan, the PR, which is waiting for the final approval. It is quite an ambitious plan, moderately ambitious, let's say, balanced. It foresees 6.1 gigawatt of additional solar capacity, incremental with respect to the 2019 installed capacity. And it foresees 3 different scenarios. 2 of the 3 scenarios, we see a much higher incremental capacity from the utility scale category, while a much lower impact from the rooftop and all the, let's say, smaller scale installations. The target is, if we look at the current capacity, we are looking at the 5.7 increase, which there is still quite a big market space for solar development, because the pipeline of utility scale projects is currently of 1.7 gigawatts. So this is also connecting with the discussion we were having before. Concluding this just short focus on regions and suitable areas. We were discussing with some of you a few months before on how many regions would have approved the suitable areas regional law before the deadline of the decree. I was saying more than 7. I cannot still celebrate because they did not approve, but 8 regions are already active, and 4 of them already approved drafts which are available, and those regions are Lombardy, as we were saying, Sardinia, which you will see with Tommaso, they approved a regional law recently. Sicily just approved the decree, and also Apulia. Other 4 regions, which are Friuli, Abruzzo, Lazio, and Tuscany, are currently working on the decree. Now I'll leave the floor to Tommaso, which will talk about the measure approved by Sardinia.
So yes, you're not celebrating, Andrea, and I don't know if you will ever celebrate because I bet on 4. So let's see who's gonna win. So you see, so far the system is pushing players in the north, and you've seen that good news from the north because Andrea showed you the current, let's say, permitting KPI for the north, and he gave you also a glimpse on the legislation for the north, and it's, let's say, promising. So it makes sense to move some of the efforts of development in the north. You've seen that, you know, the idea of narrative we have in this lookout is basically starting from the figures of Terna, SNAM, included for each of the areas of Italy in their scenarios, and to tell you a story which start from those precise figures. So we just told you the story of the north and of the new space for development which is creating in the north. Now it's the moment of telling you a completely different story, which is the story of Sardinia. You see here the numbers for Sardinia. Basically, Terna, SNAM are projecting kind of 5 to 6 gigawatt of new capacity, both for wind and PV, before 2030, which, you know, in average capacity for years, it means around 500 megawatt for PV and 300 and something megawatt for wind. Sadly, nothing of this is gonna happen because Sardinia is going to approve very soon one of the most incredible law I've ever seen in my whole career. It's the suitable area law. You know, Andrea just told you, each of the regions are obliged to define a legislation regarding suitable and not suitable, which means prohibited, actually, areas before the end of December. And Sardinia was the first in the line, first in class, because they immediately did the homework and they are already ready with a new legislation, which sounds good, but if you look at the contents of the legislation, it's incredibly obstructive to renewables. What do they do in this suitable area law, in this law area idonea? As the first thing, they define the area idonea, the suitable area, which are, as the governor itself said, Mrs. Todde said, less than 1%. So basically, almost no suitable area in the regions. Okay, it's not good, but being in suitable areas, let's say it's a nice to have. The important thing is not to be in the prohibited areas. And sadly, Sardinia, they exploited, you know, these at full, this 7-kilometer buffer from a lot of protected points in order to define prohibited areas. And you will see the results of this exercise in a few seconds when we will show you the map of prohibited areas in Sardinia. So to start, let's say very few suitable areas, a lot, to say the least, of prohibited areas. That's the first ingredient of this law. The second ingredient of the law is that this legislation basically applies to everyone. So there is no such thing as grandfathering. So if you are during the permitting process, even if you filed already, you are subject to the law. Also, if you are permitted, you are subject to the law. According to many, to me, this is clearly not legitimate, but it is what it is. Still, even if you are permitted, you are subject to the law. The only way not to be subject to the law is to have started already construction. And obviously, this reduces to the minimum the area of grandfathering. And then the third, incredible ingredient of this law, it says that even if or in case you are in an area which is not prohibited, and as you will see, there are very few of those areas, well, even in that case, you have to follow a series of weird rules and to have a series of requirements which are incredibly obstructive. Like, in case of repowering, for instance, yes, if you are not in prohibited areas, you can do repowering, but you have to keep the height of the tower and of the overall height of the plant exactly the same as it was before. And as you know, this is not exactly the business case of repowering, in which you reduce the overall numbers of turbines, substituting them with less but bigger turbines. So at least this is the business case of repowering. If you look at all the projects which are currently in permitting, 3 of them are in Sardinia. Obviously, all of them are increasing the overall height of the plant compared with the original layout, and therefore they are not possible because the law says that it's impossible. About PV, if you are in industrial area, you may occupy with your panels no more than 10% of the available free areas, which is, let's say, bizarre, considering that you are not in agricultural area, so there is no, there is no need of safeguarding food production. You are in industrial areas. And obviously, this is a big limitation for the development of PV in industrial areas, which, for instance, if it was already enforced in the past, would have made it impossible to develop all those industrial land projects which were developed in Sardinia. But the best is for PV in agricultural area. So if you are in an area which is not prohibited, well, in that case, if that area is agricultural, as the first thing, you need to do advanced agrivoltaic. So the plants need to be elevated at least 2.1 meters from the soil. And the share of land that the panels may occupy compared with the land that you own is at most 10%. And all the land must be owned at most by two different landowners. So let's make an example to make you understand what we are talking about. If we are talking about a solar project, agrivoltaic project of 42 megawatt, which is the average size of agrivoltaic project in Sardinia, currently in permitting, well, in that case, the area you need to have available for the project, for the panel, and for the rest, obviously, is at least 630 hectares. And those hectares, which are a lot, must be bought at most by two different landowners. And if you look at the dimension, the average dimension of a Sardinian farm, which is 26 hectares, which is 20 times less than you must have available for making your project possible, you understand that meeting this kind of condition is basically impossible for all of the project. So even if you are lucky, and even if you end up in an area which is not prohibited, you cannot do development anyhow because those conditions are making it basically impossible. And on top of that, you need to basically place a bond in order to make sure to make the region sure that after the operation of the project, you will decommission the plant. And indeed, it's quite a big guarantee you need to deposit because it's twice the cost of investment of the project, which you need to keep, you know, to block for the whole time of operation of the project. So for 20, 25, 30 years or so. For instance, for a 53 megawatt of wind project in Sardinia, the bond you need to make available is 160 million, which you need to keep, you know, blocked for more than 30 years, which is also another impossible condition to meet. So it's a series of impossible conditions. One would have been enough. Indeed, it's a series, one on top of the other, which is making this law very, let's say, strange and difficult to understand. But so far, you know, we didn't mention the main thing about this law, which is the dimension of the prohibited area in Sardinia, because all I've said so far is how it's possible to make development in areas which are not prohibited. So now let's see how many of the area are prohibited in Sardinia. It's a long list. You see here, we made the simulation on GIS, starting and mapping any of the Sardinia area. You see that, you know, going ahead, the map is coloring itself, and you already understand how it's going to end all of these. So basically, wait for it, 100% of Sardinia is prohibited. At least this is what we got from our GIS analysis. So yes, I told you what I've told so far, you know, just to give you some reference on the Sardinia legislation, but basically there is no such thing as not prohibited area. The whole region, Sardinia, is prohibited. There is no space for suitable areas. There is no space for ordinary areas. It's basically all prohibited, which obviously make the market dead. The market in Sardinia is dead. If you put all the ingredients I've told you so far, the fact that everything is prohibited, the fact that even if theoretically there is something not prohibited, there are incredibly obstructive condition you need to follow. The fact there is no grandfathering, except for a few projects, basically Sardinia is dead. Who's safe? All those projects which are already at an advanced stage of construction, those are safe. So those, they don't need to comply with this new legislation. For what we have seen, it's 11 projects for almost 300 megawatt. Some of them it's PV, 10, one is wind, all the other so far are not in construction and therefore are not safe. Those are, on the other hand, the existing projects which would end up in prohibited areas. Those are 5 projects already, more than 600 projects for 22.6 gigawatts. Half of them are wind, half of them are PV in terms of capacity. Those are basically dead because they will end up in prohibited areas. You can see here some details. Left side is PV. It's, if you put all these together, is around 1 gigawatt of projects permitted or quasi permitted. On the right side, you have wind, a little bit less than that, around 300 megawatts of those which are permitted at advanced stage, still dead. We didn't mention all of the projects which didn't file, and they just have, you know, the STMG, because if we did so, it would have been other 15 gigawatt to add to the count, or we didn't count also offshore, which is other 15 gigawatts to be taken into account. So this is a crazy law, and many things that this law is so crazy that it's quite obvious that it's going to be challenged by the government, which is very possible, and which is going to be declared eventually unconstitutional by the Constitutional Court, which is also very possible because there is some clear element of illegitimacy in this law. But does this change a lot about the status of Sardinia, even if there is going to be, you know, some adverse appeal by the constitutional judge in the next few months, let's say in 1 year, and therefore the government needs to make a new law in, let's say, 1 year and a half, 2 years. In the meanwhile, the market is dead. After that, what is going to be the new law like, considering that, it's very possible that the new law is going to be approved by this exact same regional government, or even if there will be a new government, in this case, you know, it's not just a matter of government. We understand that in Sardinia there is an incredibly hostile environment versus against renewable. People hate renewable. There are a lot of demonstration against renewables. Yeah, probably very well orchestrated by you know, some let's say spin doctor, by the local press. Still, even if orchestrated, it's very common, the discontent of the Sardinians against renewables. So I have to say that we are not very optimistic of this law to change very soon and to change in a favorable direction for renewables. That's why we are saying that for now, the Sardinian market, I know it's a strong term, but it's a dead market. It's a blocked market, and the outlook is certainly not positive. This is happening. Why I'm going very fast on this? This is happening while you know, the government is trying to change some of the elements of the general elements of the permitting regulation in this new law, which is called the single text of renewables, Testo Unico Rinnovabili, which is a law which is expected to put in a single law all the different routes which are spread here and there of permitting. It's not going very well, because I don't think you can expect the the permitting legislation to evolve in a different direction compared to what it was before this. So it's not going to change a lot. So far, we are at draft level. It's even worsening the scenario, but this is evolving very quickly. So I think we will give you a final feedback on the whole process about this in the next few months. And then moving on with our story, we told you about the north. We told you about Sardinia. Now it's the moment of Sicilia, the moment of Sicily. And Sicily, it's interesting because it allows us to tell you a story about revenues, finally. So far, we talked mostly about permitting. Now we're talking about revenues, because we think there might be an interesting story to tell you about Sicily and revenues. As the first thing, let's start from the Ternas figures. And we are quite in a different place here compared with what we have seen before, because in Sicily, Terna is projecting, as for utility scale PV, at most 5 gigawatt to be commissioned before 2030. And if you look at this, which is the number of permitted project, already permitted project, and you sum this to this figure, this is the number of quasi-permitted project. It's almost, 10 gigawatt. So the amount of permitted, ready to build projects is very close. It's even more than the target capacity for 2030. So this is technically a saturated market, and we have seen this in some transaction. We understand that many investors are understanding that Sicily is becoming very risky and very saturated. They say, because the price prediction for Sicily, the zonal prices are expected to be low, and that is also why making PPAs in Sicily is difficult, and therefore there may be some curtailment risk connected to the Sicilian production, and all of this is making Sicily extremely risky. Also, you find someone which is thinking in the FERX way, and they also think that Sicily is risky because they expect to have some penalization within FERX for Sicilian project. There are these coefficients, we talk about this, and they expect to have very penalizing coefficients in Sicily. And that is why probably, the price for ready-to-build project in Sicily have dropped over time. Couple of years ago, we were 300K plus. Now we are around this figure over here. So the price is quite steeply dropping. Is this right or not? Well, obviously, market is always right by definition, but probably, at least in the short term, there might be some interesting opportunity in Sicily, and this opportunity is depending from FERX. But to understand what this opportunity is and what are the risks connected to this opportunity, it's the moment of telling you, of updating you about FERX. You know that the FERX story started more than 1 year ago, when there was the consultation. Then we have, the usual path, which is made of the first draft, the second draft, the opinions, with the government, which was incredibly optimistic about the possibility of closing the whole process before the end of 2024. And they were saying that it was extremely realistic to assume to have the first procedure in 2024. We were a bit skeptical about that because we were fearing that the whole approval process at European level would have been longer than they were saying. And indeed, you probably know this, in July, there was quite a change of direction. So the government came up with this new idea of dividing the FERX in two, and to start with approving the first part of the FERX, which they called the transitional FERX, FERX transitorio. What is the idea behind this short FERX, the transitional FERX? Is the fact that since it's short and since it's gonna end before the end, it's gonna end in 2025, a fast track of approval at European level can be used within the so-called temporary framework, which is an European way to approve projects which are urgent, and the only condition is that the aid which is granted through this program is going to end in 2020, 2025. And they went through this road, Obviously, the condition they need to follow is that the support was going to end in 2020, in 2025. They started the whole procedure. They already notified the decree to Brussels in the last few days, and they expect to receive it back with, a green light at the end of November, at most at the beginning of December, and to approve it very, very, very fastly before the end of the year. So the news here is that we're going to have a decree, a FEREX, a short FEREX, let's say the starter of the FEREX approved before the end of the year, not the auction before the end of the year, because even after the approval, there is some technical timeline to be respected, 60 days plus 90 days, let's say overall 2-3 months before the first auction could take place. And the first auction could take place, in our opinion, in March or April, at most in May. In the meanwhile, the proper FEREX, the red one, has not died, is going on with the approval process, which is going to be longer, and it will be ready for 2026. So right after the transitional FEREX will be ended. So the whole program is going to look eventually like this. 2025, you're going to have 2 auctions within the transitional FEREX. And then 2026, you're going to have a series of auctions for 3 or 4 years. We don't know that. We don't even know how many auctions are going to take place. Probably the whole program is going to be 10, 2 plus 8 in the proper FEREX, and the capacity which is going to be allocated is for sure 10 gigawatt for solar and 4 gigawatt for wind in 2025. We don't know how many in the procedure 1, how many in the procedure 2, but we know that the sum of the procedure will be 10 and 4 gigawatt for PV and for wind. And then after that, we don't know yet already the proper FEREX, with theoretically should be 30 gigawatt for PV and 12.5 gigawatt for wind. So we know this, and going through the FEREX draft, compared with the transitional FEREX draft, compared with the previous draft that we had in the past, we have a few differences. The first difference is, we're going to see in a few seconds, is that we don't have anymore the coefficients. We have zonal premiums, which are helping a bit the north. Then we have some tool in order to make the auction a little bit more competitive, like cutting the less competitive offers. And eventually, there is the reduction of the curtailment protection. Let's start with the first, which is the introduction of zonal premium and the abolition of the zonal coefficients, at least for the moment. Then we expect the zonal coefficients to come back again in the proper FEREX in 2026. But for the moment, it's zonal premium. What does it mean? So let's assume that these are the tariffs that any of the projects in this area are offering within the auction. Well, are aiming, let's say, they need in order to be in the money in each of the zone. So it's dummy number, but obviously we assume that Sicily is more competitive than the north. So north needs a 75 euro per megawatt hour tariff, whereas Sicily needs 61 euro per megawatt tariff. With the introduction of this premium we had in this transitional decree, you have a 4 euro per megawatt hour premium for project in the center and a 10 euro per megawatt hour premium for projects in the north. Meaning this, that in this case, the projects in the north is able to bid, since they need 75, but they know that they're going to have 10 euros per megawatt hour from the system after the auction, they can bid 65. So obviously, this can have an impact. This can have an impact on the on the ranking of the auction, on the competitive assessment. If you ask us, we don't expect it to be, revolutionary, because probably 10 euros per megawatt hour is not enough to mismatch the different level of LCOE between Sicily and the north. So the impact on the competitiveness of Sicily and the south is not going to be high. It would have probably been higher, and look at this box on the right side, if they would have used zonal coefficients and if they would penalize maximum they could the project in Sicily. In those cases, the premium, we described the system already in the previous lockout, so I won't go back to it. But in this case, the premium which was given to the north thanks to the use of zonal coefficients which are penalizing project in Sicily in the south would have been much more heavy, and the impact on project in Sicily and in the south would have been more than this. Second thing, which is in the new draft, second new difference compared with the past version of the FERX, there is a cut to the capacity offer, so basically to the supply curve, even if in case the target quota is not reached. So technically, there won't be any more such thing as under-participated auction in which everyone wins. So let's make an example. You see, this is, you must be already familiar with this kind of shape, which is the demand curve in a FERX auction. And let's assume that in this auction, the capacity which is participating is 3.6 gigawatt. The target quota for the auction was higher than that, was 4.5 gigawatt. So given that the auction capacity, the participation in the auction is below the quota, which is a technical situation of under participation, well, in that case, the last 5%, so the highest offer, the last 5% of the participants will be cut and won't win, even if the amount of capacity offer is below the amount of capacity available. Obviously, the purpose of this is to make the offer competitive. This is not happening in the case, obviously, in the case in which the participation is more than the target, but even if the participation is less than the target quota, if all the project bidded below a certain level, which in this case is this level, which is the lower strike price, 65 euro per megawatt hour. You see here, everyone bidded below that, while in this case, there is no cut. So everyone wins. You may understand easily what is the purpose of the system. And then last thing, curtailment. Previous draft were extremely generous with curtailment. So in all the situation in which you had or either technical curtailment or economical curtailment, well, in both cases, you will still get paid. You were still paid, and you were paid immediately. So there was the methodology of the producible energy. So they calculated the amount of energy you would have produced, and they were paying you right in the moment in which you would have produced it. Now they still pay you, but they don't pay you immediately. They pay you at the end of the support period, which is basically 2046 for a project which is starting next year. This is quite different. Obviously, the postponement of the payment has an impact on the on the business plan, on the discounted cash flow of the project, and we estimated this impact in around 1% less of unlevered IRR in case of curtailment level, average curtailment level during whole production of 10%, which is indeed, as you will see in the second part, a very, very high level. So to make a long story short, yes, this is not good news, but it's not gonna be disruptive. And then last thing I'm showing you, this is something I think we're gonna show you for the next few years. This is our high-level idea of competitiveness of each of the auction, which is gonna take place in the next few years. We adopted these images, animal images, in order to give you the idea of a very competitive auction when you see the shark, of a normally competitive auction when you see the fox, and of a quite relaxed auction when you see the panda. And this is the situation for PV, higher part of the slide. You see, we expect high competition in the first procedure, and then still quite competition, good competition also for the following procedure. And the case of wind, it's pretty different. We don't expect that much competition before the eligible project for wind are less than for PV, because there is no backlog, because many of the projects already participated to the FAIR 1 auctions. By the way, there is going to be another FAIR 1 auction in the next few days. So FAIR 1 is never ending. And after that, maybe a slight increase of competition thanks to new project permitted, but in a general framework in which we don't expect wind procedure to be this competitive. And this is high level on the long term. Let's look at 2020, 2025. What we can expect from the auction in 2025. We already said that for solar, we expect quite a competition, but who's gonna win and how? This is quite, a big question. We are working a lot to give answers to this question, because we develop a model which is gonna simulate the results of the auction, giving you all the necessary information, to approach with an exhaustive level of info the auction. We are making a Monte Carlo simulation on all the inputs of any unit, any project which is going to participate to the auction. We have this information, and we assume an LCOE for any of these projects, and we mounted a series of possible behavior of the project in the auction. And we made the simulation for the first auction, and these were the results. In terms of geographical allocation, we expect a huge number of projects to be winning the auction in Sicily, a good number of projects in Lazio and generally speaking, in the south, not a big number of projects winning the auction in the north. This is both due to the fact that there are a lot of projects in the south and in Sicily, which are ready to build and may participate, and there are not a lot of projects in the north. And B, to the fact that this 10 euro per megawatt hour zonal premium doesn't seem to be enough to compensate, the mismatch of LCOE between north and the south. So a lot of Sicily will probably win the auction. And we come back to the point we showed you before. This may open a window of opportunity for ready-to-build project in Sicily, which may find a route to market, even if most of the investors think they will not. So it's done, my part. So I leave the floor to Andrea and Salvatore for the market, for the power markets and battery parts. Thank you. See you next year. Bye.
Oh, thank you, Tommaso. Good afternoon. Well, if you are looking for CFD tariffs that can stabilize your revenues for 20 years without going through the auctions. There is now a new regulatory mechanism that allows you to do so. It is called the energy release. And well, of course, there's no such a thing as a free lunch. So for getting this tariff, there is some requirements, and first of all, it's a requirement of timing, be on time to and be prepared to participate to the mechanism, as the timeline for the energy release is quite strict, and it's quite short, let me say, because now we are waiting for the operative rules of the GSE, following the decree that has been approved in July. And following the operative rules, the GSE will publish the notice of the start of the mechanism, collecting the expression of interest from energy-intensive consumers, because this mechanism is made mainly, firstly, for energy-intensive companies in Italy. And then by the end of the year, or by January, the expression of interest windows is closed. Then the results in terms of volumes that have been qualified for the mechanism will be published in the beginning of 2025. And then the energy consumers, the energy-intensive consumer, should sign the so-called advanced payment contract. In a moment, I will describe this contract. And starting from the date of signing of the advanced payment contract, the energy-intensive consumer have 40 months for signing a fallback contract with a producer, an IPP or a vertical integrated utility. And starting the commissioning of the plants, then this will start also the tariff for the production. So let me say that the first important things to know is that this mechanism has a quite short window of opportunity, which is represented by the next few months, when the supply, let me say, the producer, the IPPs, can engage with the demand, energy-intensive consumers, in front of the GSE. Let me point out that this kind of contract are not PPA contracts, but the PPA issue is still involved in this mechanism, and we will see later. The mechanism is based on two pillars, basically. So the advance payment of the advance payment contract, which represent the CFD tariff for the energy consumer, for the energy-intensive consumer. So the final client has a virtual hedging for 65 euro per megawatt hour, which is a value that should be confirmed, but we expect this value for the first 3 years at a volume that is, if the volume qualified under the contract, the advance payment contract. Then after that, or following the advance payment contract, within 14 months, as I said, the project of renewable project of at least 200 kilowatt should be commissioned and should start its production and get for 20 years a 65 CFD two-ways tariff. At least the tariff will be the same at the same value that has been defined for advanced payment contract. So we expect 65 also for the sellback. So virtually the energy intensive consumer will hedge for 3 years a volume which will be given back in the following 20 years by the energy producer. But the tariffs are regulated with the GSE. So the producer get from the GSE the difference if negative between the spot price, zonal price, and the tariff, or should pay the GSE with the difference if positive between the spot price, zonal day-ahead price against the tariff. So this is the main architecture of the mechanism, but there is one important thing, that each plant, each project, each asset can sell back a maximum of 50% of its production. So for a given project, just the half of the capacity can be qualified for the energy release. And the rest of the capacity, well, you can go merchant, but you can also access the FER-X mechanism. Then the energy release could represent a sort of hybridization of revenue models. On one hand, for half of capacity and energy release, a tariff with the GSE, and for the rest of capacity, you can get, by winning the auction, the FER-X tariff. Of course, is subject to the competition. But there are also other differences between the mechanisms. Of course, the timing, as I said, the energy release is a window of opportunity for the last few months of this year, because the energy intensive consumer should define and should be sure to find a project that match its needs in terms of volumes in the when the notice of the GSE will be published. But the first FER-X auction, at least for the transitional FER-X decree, will be possibly in the second quarter for the next year. So first, you have to qualify to energy release and then participate to the FER-X. And as I said, under the energy release, there's no competitive procedure. The tariff is given, and you have just to find a counterpart which should be an energy-intensive consumer, as defined by the list published by the agency controlled by the government. And on the other hand, on the FER-X, you have to go through the competitive auction. There's not indexation of the tariff for energy release, at least as has been we expect to be as according to the draft decree of FER-X. And the general terms of regulation will be probably connected to the FER-1 decree. So for the curtailment, In case of curtailment, it is possible that 20-year energy release tariff will be extended by a number of hours equal to those that the generation has been curtailed. While, as described by Tommaso, under the FER-X mechanism, there is will be paid, the tariff will be paid at the end of the 20 years of the tariff. Well, an important matter is the guarantee that the two counterparts, both the energy intensive consumer and the producer should present. We expect something that will not be very far from what is being provided by the FER-X draft. And one important difference is related to the GOs, because under the energy release, the production connected to the capacity qualified for the energy release should and the GOs produced by these volumes should be taken by the GSE without any kind of valorization by the producer. So at the moment, we know that there will be a tariff, 20-year tariff, with this kind of timing, and the thing that I said about inflation GOs are quite certain. But there are many things that should be confirmed or defined still by the operational rules that the GSE should publish. Of course, the final tariff, the volumes, which will be related also to the volumes that energy consumer will qualify, but we expect that this will involve a relevant capacity in terms of PV capacity, because we think that this mechanism is most related as an opportunity for PV plants. So we expect that will involve between 3.5 to 5 gigawatts of capacity. Should be confirmed the rules of the curtailment, and should be also confirmed the possible integration, the FER-X. Well, at least for the transitional FER-X, we don't see particular issues, because for participate to the auction, the project must not have started the commissioning, the construction works. So it's something that is compatible with consistent with the energy release. But maybe the final FER-X that we will envisage, the so-called irreversible investment decision and the energy release sellback contract signing can represent such a decision. But it's something that it's not really an issue, because given the timing of the mechanism, the overlap is with the transitional FER-X auctions and not with the final FER-X regulation. As I said, the guarantees should be defined some first detail, but we should expect, we should wait the final rules of the GSE, and of course the energy consumer final client should find an agreement with the producer, with the IPP, in order to don't bear the risk of commissioning of the plant, because there are, a perimeter of project that can be suitable for the mechanism. And of course, one requirement is defined by the regulation. But, the project should be commissioned within 40 months from the advance payment contract signing. And the commissioning can also start before the end of the advance payment time. So the 36 months of the advance payment. The sellback can start also before the ending of the advance payment. But it will be very important for the energy consumer to find a project that is reliable in terms of time of commissioning, and reliable, at least, reliable, but also with the right sizing, given the volumes that the final consumer wants to hedge through the energy release mechanism. And the volume is one of the main issues of the mechanism. Just let me summarize how it works. So, for instance, if you have a 10 megawatt PV project, then you can qualify the half of the capacity, 5 megawatt, okay? Let's say that it's in a zone where the GSE define the equivalent hours of production in 1,800, because the GSE needs to define at least the parameters of equivalent hours in order to calculate the expected production, the total aggregate production in the 20 years of the first 20 years of the commissioning of the plant. So if the plant produces 18 gigawatt hours per year, so on an annual basis, so the total aggregated incentivized volumes are 180 gigawatt hours, and that is 60 gigawatt hours per year for the first 3 years for the electricity consumer. From the point of view of the energy intensive client, the calculation is the same. If the final client consumer wants to cover 60 gigawatt per year through the tariff, then it depends, of course, on the project, but the project that should engage, if the project is in a zone with 1,800 equivalent hours, is 10 megawatt of capacity. Of course, maybe the project is in the node, so the equivalent hours will be less. But in any case, now we should just wait the definition of the GSE, but we think that for each terawatt hour that will be qualified by final clients, the capacity involved on the supply side will be into a range between 150, 60 megawatt to at least 200, according to the general assumed equivalent hours per zone. But and we expect that the GSE will do so. So it seems quite a smooth mechanism if you find the right counterpart, but the regulation introduced a an issue that we think is the actual and the only obstacle for the mechanism, which is the PPA that the two parts should sign for the exceeding capacity. Exceeding capacity compared to the capacity qualified under the energy release. So for the energy not under the energy release regulation. But what does it mean, PPA, under this mechanism? It's still not defined. The PPA is generally negotiated, agreed between the parts, and are the two parts which define what is a PPA, not the regulation. So generally, a PPA is based on a fixed price for some years, for few to years to a long-term PPA. But if maybe the producer can be attracted by a fixed price, of course, this fixed price should be higher than the expected value that can get from the X auction. But in a short time, we don't expect the energy-intensive clients are willing to enter into a fixed price PPA. They try to be to the risk the energy procurement through the energy release, and it's not very logical to enter in a mechanism that could redefine the risk. I'm not saying that the PPAs increase the risk for the consumer, but it's completely another approach. So the variable price under the PPA is something that is more consistent with the features of the mechanism, because the producer if it participates on the if it gets the per X tariff, is willing to get a zonal price. So on hourly basis, the variable price, and the energy intensive client also can leave this capacity, a part of the volume floating, but it also depends if it has any other constraints on the floating part of the supply. In any case, is something that is not helping the two parts, especially if we consider other requirements that the regulation must define, because there are some uncertainties that should be clarified. For instance, does the PPA have to be registered on this Bacheca PPA that is managed by the GME, which is something that the law introduced in order to register any PPA that will be signed? But those PPAs under the Bacheca PPAs featured by physical delivery is something that is not very easy to manage. A virtual PPA, or at least the possibility to manage as the two parts want, without putting requirements or constraints, would be cost better, and will increase the chances that the mechanism will work. The tenure of the PPA, does the PPA should have a minimum years of functioning, and the CCT, the difference between the zonal price and the national price, of course, is something that in this case should be paid by the producer. So it's something that when there are many matters and many issues that should be defined, and we hope that the regulation will be not very constraining for this, because it's a very important mechanism for a relevant part of the industrial sector of Italy, and because it's a relief from the most energy intensive producers factories in Italy, and so if there is some very, we think, pointless requirements of the PPAs, it will be a risk also for the government to jeopardize this kind of mechanism, which is a very wide mechanism, because the total consumption of energy intensive consumers is between 60 to 70 terawatt hours, and more than 4,000 companies involved. And on the other hand, it involves about 24 gigawatt of eligible project that can decide to match to combine the energy release tariff with the FER-X tariff. Of course, now the issue is matching the supply and demand, and we are working on this matching. We are trying to be accelerators, because the weeks that the window of opportunities is of just few weeks. So if you want to know more, just drop an email. So and the importance of the energy release for producers is also related to the situation now of prices that are offered by PPAs, by utilities, by traders. We every month we conduct this survey between 6 of bankable players, or at least the main players for the PPA nexus in Italy, and we see that the prices are still quite low, not very changing over the next month on average terms, but there is some increase on the wind profile prices, but it's not enough. It's really not enough at the moment for making the projects in the morning. So now we can close this chapter dedicated to the energy release and start again with the scenarios of the TSO. And I leave the floor to Salvatore. And
Thank you, Andrea.
To share.
So while I start to share, well, as Andrea was saying, the scenario changes quite a lot. And as Tommaso said, on the renewables, so also on batteries, we have some newness in the new scenario. You see here how it seems that there is a significant growth of BESS capacity, but indeed this is something that has been reduced with respect to the past version of the Terna scenarios. In particular, we see that in 2030, Terna expects to have batteries for a total of 71 gigawatt hour, and it still keep the same different types of battery until 2030. So we have small scale, capacity market, and max and utility scale assets. And while in the past we had some issue in understanding what was inside the small scale type, now I think that we can fairly say that small scale is related to residential. This is because or residential and CNI. This is because basically in the last year, we've seen a lot of gigawatt hour installed in this sector, and also because in the MACSE, it seems that the batteries coupled with PV plants can participate, so it's not small scale anymore, they are considered utility scale. And you see how the differentiation between the market zone is clear in terms of capacity installed. We have the north, which will see some capacity, market capacity, which it considers only capacity awarded in the past auctions, in the previous auctions, while the rest is totally entirely small scale. And in the rest of Italy, we see a lot of capacity accounting for MACSE. But let's dig a little bit more in the number, and we can see how, with respect to the past scenarios from Terna, number are changed quite a lot. In particular, you can see how in the southern part of the country we have a reduction which arrives up to 50% of the total capacity previously forecasted, and this could be caused by the fact that Terna has moved PV capacity, utility scale capacity from south to small scale in the north, but also I think that this is the mainly reason. And you can see how this is this will impact for sure the auctions in MACSE in the south. The only region which sees an increase in capacity forecasted is Sardinia, where the 30%, where there is a growth of the 30% with respect to the previous scenarios. So we are in a situation where it seems that the capacity it's really low compared to the past, mainly due to the new distribution of utility scale, but nothing changed in terms of the grid. So it seems that the reason behind this movement is just the PV. Also because if we take a deeper look into what Terna is forecasting for 2030 in terms of grid, we see that the numbers previously stated are confirmed, except for some slight delays in the interconnection between central north and central south, and between north and central south. You see here there are 800 megawatt and 2 gigawatt missing in the two interconnection respectively. But to be fair, Terna already suggested that this kind of delay could happen in the last 10-year network development plan, where they defined that this intervention could take place between 2030 and 2032. An interesting thing that can be found in this document is the fact that Terna is forecasting an additional 2 gigawatt interconnection, which will directly link the north and the south. And so it's likely that we will see this additional interconnection in the next 10-year network development plan. But let's look at what these numbers in terms of PV, storage, interconnection, and renewable in general will mean for the system in 2030. Also because there is something that is starting to be considered again, which is the curtailment. Because if in the draft of the FERX, definitive FERX, we see that the curtailment is something that is not bothering market players, because the idea is that the system will cover for this cost. In the transitory FERX, in the energy release, and also in PPAs, curtailment is something which should be taken into account. And so we have started from this number from Terna. We put those numbers inside our market model to see how curtailment may change, considering the different impact, the impact of the different factors that drive the curtailment. So we've taken the 2030 year as it was, and we started to add the different key elements of the electricity system in order to see their impact on the system. And adding only the renewable, you see here in this chart in the lower part of the slide, we have added a 10% share of the total capacity forecasted to be installed by 2030 in the scenario. And you see how increasing this capacity, we have a significant increase of curtailment and a clear split between market zones. We have Sicily, Sardinia, and Calabria, where curtailment, which can account up to 50%, almost to 50%, can be witnessed, while the rest of the countries show lower numbers, but still significant with respect of today, accounting for a total curtailment of the 80% of the total production. And you see here that there is a significant impact. And then we started to add additional feature in the system. Adding the storage reduces the curtailment quite a lot. It lowered the numbers up to 10%, down to 10%. If you add also the load, which is significant in the Terna scenario, you again reduce this number and arrive to 6%. And if we simulate the system as a whole, considering also hydrogen, flexible demand, and export, you see that we land to a number which is the same one obtained by Terna. So this means that our model works, or at least it works like the one from Terna. But you see here how the curtailment is significantly spread across 3 different zones, South Sicily and Sardinia, while the rest of the zone is still very low. This is something that can change quite a lot according to the distribution of the different parameters in the system. But yeah, we need to really take a look at where renewable and batteries will grow in the system in order to understand on how the system will change up to 2030. And talking about batteries, batteries were one of the main topic of the last capacity market auction, and the next capacity market auction, which will be held in the next month, are something that will for sure increase the amount of capacity installed in the system. In the last capacity auction, we've seen a reduction of prices, which have been lowered to 67.5 thousand euro per megawatt per year, with 40 gigawatt assigned in the capacity market auction. And you see that starting from this number, we can start to understand and start to reason about what to expect in the next auction. In the next auction, what we can expect? Well, let's start from what has happened in the past. So a reduction of prices, a significant reduction of prices with respect to the cap. And this is because a small amount of capacity, only 200 megawatt, have participated in the auction. And this capacity is mainly capacity coming from batteries. Also, there is capacity coming from retrofit of thermal plant, but we have 3 batteries assigned, 2 from EP Produzione, 1 from Metlen. You see here the slide, there isn't the name of Metlen because at the moment in which the lookout was published in Italian last week, this information were not public, but we suggested that this battery can be from Metlen because comparing the results of the capacity market with our database in batteries, we understood that it could be a 2-hour duration asset in the south authorized, and this battery was the right one in the end. So we see that batteries are interested in participating in the capacity market, and they participate with a 2-hour duration. So it seems that the market is going towards this direction for batteries inside the capacity market. We also know that part of the capacity awarded has decided to withdraw from the mechanism, and so we have 60 megawatts that will participate, are likely to participate in the next auction, so contributing again in a reduction of the prices. Still, the main player are the thermal ones, and still there are some uncertainties around the outcome of this auction because Terna had some issues with the couple of players. They've challenged the outcome of the auction to the Administrative Court of Lombardy, and still we are waiting for a decision from the TAR in January. But let's see what will happen. In the meantime, new auction will come. And what to expect from a new auction? Well, there are some elements that suggest that maybe the price can be stable with a lowering trend. And this is because despite the thermal decommissioning and the demand growth, which actually in the next auction, they will be the same because no big decommissioning from thermal plant is expected, and demand has been confirmed by Terna. Well, there is the inflation in the premium, but yeah, the fact that new batteries will participate, and maybe the fact that Terna will need to consider that some renewable capacity will enter into an operation before 2026, it seems that in the next auction the price could be slightly lower with respect to what we witnessed in the past auction. And this is the super short term, but what to expect in the medium term? We need to take into account that this is a mechanism that can add some stable revenues to the batteries business case. And for batteries in zones where the MACSE will not come, like in the north, because it's likely that there will not be any kind of volume from MACSE batteries. Well, this is the only stable revenues that they can achieve, and so it seems that they can decide to have a preserved premium, which is really low, almost close to zero, because in the end, something is better than nothing. Especially in those cases where the investment is not driven by the single asset logic, but it's more a matter of portfolio, maybe also at international level from players which have batteries operating all over the world. So we expect that the trend could be different. We can have a best case of a worst case scenario for the future scenarios of the capacity market. In the best case, we have the batteries which will participate, they will decide that the price is going too low. So at a certain point, the price will stabilize, and then it will slightly grow thanks to new demand from Terna and thanks to the inflation, but still it will become more or less stable after this reduction expected in the super short term, so auction 2026 and 2027. While in a worst case scenario, we can have batteries willing to enter into the market with the capacity market at a really low price, because in the end, capacity market is not constraining them that much, and the impact of the market is there, whether they participate into the market or not. So also the fact that the price can be really low, it's something that it's an option which is there. So we need to see what the future will show us, but we expect that the price, it's something, it will have a bearish trend and not for sure a bullish trend in the future. So we will have new capacity market auction between December, February. Then there will be a MACSE auction, and after this we will have the 2028 capacity market auction. And then starting from that point on, it seems that capacity market will be something structurally integrated into the Italian electricity market. And so market player need to decide whether to go into the capacity market or to just wait for the MACSE auction and then going into the 2028 capacity market auction as the second best, risking the fact that the MACSE capacity will start to decrease significantly, and also the capacity participating in 2026 and 2027 auction will significantly reduce the cap in the premium in the 2020 capacity market auction. So this is something that the operator needs to understand, whether it's better to go capacity market or MACSE. In our opinion, depends on the region where you're located. And of course, as the hybrid model into the MACSE is something that does not have that much sense, because the revenues are affected by the fact that part of the capacity is within MACSE, and the merchant share is affected by the clawback, and we see this in a moment or two. So our opinion is that if you want to try to if you really want to try the merchant option with the battery, well, it's better to go with a single asset fully in the capacity market. It's better before than after, because as I said before, the premium could be higher in the first auction, and keeping the rest of the portfolio 100% MACSE. MACSE, which has been published, and we expect to have new auction between May and June. We had the MASE, which has approved the regulation. We had Terna, which has published the regulation, but still something is missing, like date of the auction, technical documento fabbisogni, which is the target, which is the demand from Terna in the auction, and also the technical feature of the asset participating in the MACSE is something that is still missing. So we need to see. We need to wait for Terna to publish this information the next day to see really when the auction will be. Still, it's likely that the COD, even if the regulation is not super clear, will be starting from the 1st of January 2028. So MACSE is there. And is there with a new regulation, which is really similar to the last one published in April. I will go fast on this, and I'll leave you to the report. But the mechanism with the quotas is the same as before. So we have a national quota, which is affected by the qualified capacity at the national level. In case the qualified capacity, the 80% of qualified capacity is lower than the national need, this will be the national quota that will be awarded into the auction. But in each area, we will have some maximum and minimum quota to be to be bought by Terna in that area. And so we will have some kind of possibility to export with this mechanism capacity between market zones. And so there could be some cases in which, for example, auction could be not that much competitive in some areas, even if the Terna has designed quite well this mechanism in order to have auction always competitive. And the case of not competitive zonal auction is the case where there is a big spread between maximum quota and minimum quota. So this means that you have a high national capacity, you have a high quota from Terna in a zone, so maximum quota which is high, but you have few qualified bets in that area. So you have this high spread, and maybe the auction cannot be too much competitive, even if you still have the pressure of the national cap, which can be influenced by also, as for example, batteries in the north. So in that case, this could help to keeping the cap very high. But bottom line, we do not expect that the zone difference can